Welcome to today's event, Unequal Choices, How Social Class Shapes Where High Achieving Students Apply to College. Let me say that again. Unequal Choices, How Social Class Shapes Where High Achieving Students Attend College or Apply to College. My name is Stephen Small. I'm a professor in the Department of Africana of African American Studies, and I'm the director of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for today's event, the Center for the Studies in Higher Education and the Department of Sociology here at UC Berkeley. Today's event is sponsored directly by the Center for Research on Social Change, which is one of the constituent centers here in the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. Before we begin the event, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land, and they've done so since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with the university values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this brief land acknowledgement, we affirm the Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. The format of today's event is that after I introduce him, Professor Law is going to talk about his new book for about 30 minutes. Then Professor Britton will share some thoughts and engage in a conversation with Professor Law. We will give Professor Law a few minutes to respond to comments before opening things up to a Q&A. If you have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, and I will ask those questions on your behalf. Let me know if you'd like me to mention your name or if you would like those questions to be anonymous. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Yang Law, who is Assistant Teaching Professor in the Department of Sociology at UC Merced. Professor Law completed his PhD in the Department of Sociology right here at Berkeley. And while he was here on campus, he was a graduate fellow at the ISSI. And so it's a special pleasure to have him return as an alum. Professor Law teaches and conducts research on education, stratification among Americans, race and ethnicity, and political participation. He's published papers on the political participation of immigrants, the educational experiences of low-income immigrant youth, and social class differences in where high-achieving students apply to college. Today, he has kindly agreed to join us to talk about his book, Unequal Choices, which was published earlier this year. Welcome, Professor Law, and over to you.
All right, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Stephen, and thank you to the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues for having me. It feels like a full circle moment. I was a graduate fellow from 2006 or 2016 to 2018, and the graduate fellows program played a pivotal role in me finishing my dissertation. And so I'm very fortunate and grateful to be here. I remember as a former fellow, we would organize a book, just speakers and presentations, and we would reach out to former graduate fellow programs. They'll come in and they'll talk about the book, and there's and now I get to do that. So it just feels very surreal, given just how the journey was like. And so I'm happy to be here and talk about my book that was recently published by Rutgers University just this past March. All right, so the title of my book is Unequal Choice, and that's also the title of my talk today. As Stephen mentioned, I'm an assistant teaching professor at University of California, Merced in the Department of Sociology. If any of you are interested in this position, I think this is a new position in the UC, definitely reach out to me. I've had several people from sociology reach out to me about this position, and they've been they've been able to successfully apply for such positions across the UC. So hopefully there are more of these job openings in the future. We can get more folks into these jobs as well. All right, so before I talk more about my findings, I'm going to give some background information about this study and the motivations behind it. So in our society, we often assume, part of the explanations for why we see so few low-income students in these elite colleges, top colleges in America, the argument is often that there's not enough qualified candidate, that the reason why there's so few low-income first generation at the nation's top colleges and is often attributed to a lack of qualifications. But research has actually shown that even after we take into account academic qualification, social class still affects where students apply to college. And so I'll present a graphics that gets at the point I'm trying to make here. So here you see a graphics of students who have a score of 1080 on the SAT. And so, if these are students who score 1080 on the SAT, what's their likelihood of attending a selective colleges, a competitive college, also known as one of the top colleges in the United States. So as you can see from this diagram here, students who come from higher income backgrounds are much more likely to attend these selective colleges. Students from lower income families are less likely to attend these colleges. And as I mentioned previously, there's been a lot of kind of public conversations about this, and the argument often goes back to, well, there's not enough qualified students to attend these colleges. But research has consistently shown that that's not actually the case, that even when we have students who are highly qualified, few of them actually apply to these colleges. And so that's where my research is focused on. It's not focused on why we don't admit as many low-income students, but it's really focusing on why few low-income students, working class students, actually apply to selective colleges. These are often competitive or top colleges across the United States. Okay, and so that's what my book is going to be focused on, and my talk today will be on as well. And why is there a focus on these selective colleges? A main reason is that attendance at these selective colleges is often a pathway to positions of power in our country. So if you're a first generation college student or a low income student, just going to college is going to elevate you to the next social class. And we assume that's going to be a middle class. But if you attend one of these top selective colleges in America, your chances of not only social mobility, but also mobility into positions of power are going to be much higher. And so I'm going to show you some statistics about why is it important for us to think about making sure that more low-income students actually pursue these type of colleges. Okay? And these colleges are very important for positions of power in America. And so even though 1% of college students actually attend these highly selective private colleges, 10% of Fortune 500 CEOs actually graduate from these colleges. And a quarter of the US senators in this country graduate from these universities. And 3/4 of Supreme Court justice from the past half century attend these universities. And so as we think about how to diversify positions of power in this country, we have to think about what are the pathways, and attending these selective private colleges is often a stepping stone to positions of power in America. And so that's why there's a lot of concerns about the lack of diversity at these top colleges, because they are often a stepping stone to positions of power in America. So that's what my research is focused on in this book. It's really about the divergence and applications between lower income students and middle and upper middle class students. So the research question for my book is, how does social class shape where high achieving students apply to college? So I looked at the process by interrogating the different stages in the college choice process. So I asked students questions about when did you first start thinking about college? When did you become sure that you were going to attend college, I talked to them about the preparation process as well. How do they prepare to get into college? I also asked them questions about the application process. So which college did they choose, and the reason behind that as well. Okay. So not only did I focus on the different stages, I also focus on how does social class shape the meanings and understandings that students have about higher education. So what's the purpose of education? Why should people go to college? What happens in college? Because these understandings play a pivotal role in shaping the type of colleges that students find is appropriate for them. And so based on this question, I conducted 46 in-depth interviews with students who are categorized as high achieving. So in order for students to qualify for participation in this research project, they needed to have an SAT of at least a 1260 or an ACT of at least a 28. Because I'm looking at these are highly qualified students. They should be competitive applicants for the nation's top colleges. Are they applying to these top colleges? If not, what are some of the reasons? And how does social class affect those college choices? All right. So I divided my sample into higher SCS students and lower SCS students. Lower SCS students are students we typically define as low income, working class, first generation college students. Higher SCS students are students we typically define as middle and upper middle class. And so here I'm going to present just how their college choices are different, and then I'll shift on over to what are some of the explanations behind these differences in college choice. All right, so of the 23 students from each of the social class background, all of them apply to in-state colleges, which is not surprising. The divergence comes to be much more visible when we actually look at whether or not students actually apply to out-of-state colleges. And so here, higher SCS students are much more likely to apply to out-of-state colleges. So 21 out of 23 students apply to an out-of-state college, compared to only 7 out of 23 lower SCS students. And so by not applying to out-of-state colleges, lower SCS often miss out on some of these highly selected private colleges. And some of these examples are Ivy League universities. As I mentioned in my previous slide, Ivy League universities and some other highly selected private colleges are often the stepping stone to positions of power in this country. So these are kind of the major differences that I identified through my sample of students in California. So the difference here is not necessarily that lower SCS students aren't applying to selective colleges. In California, we have a very unique situation where any student that applies to one of the top 5 or 6 public universities, let's say, for example, UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, these are all considered selective colleges, selective public colleges. And so the difference is not it's not between selective and non-selective colleges. The difference in my sample, given the fact that California does have a lot of selective private colleges, is that lower SCS students are less likely to apply to colleges out of California, and therefore they miss out on some of these other types of universities that exist. Okay. All right, and so my argument is differences in college application are shaped not only by access to information. So of course, information is crucial for students to actually apply to these colleges. If they don't know about liberal arts colleges, they're not going to apply to these colleges. Likewise for Ivy League University. I make the case that information is only part of the explanation, that the context under which such information is received is also essential as well. So for instance, if students hear about these colleges from a pamphlet, that's very different from hearing about these colleges, perhaps from their parents, from their high school peers, from alumni, or even from the counselor. And so lower SCS students receive information differently about colleges than their higher SCS peers. And this has an influence on the types of colleges that they deem appropriate for them. Okay. it's not just about information, but it's also about social class experiences and upbringing. As students think about what to do for the next 4 years of their life, at the conclusion of their high school career, they're often thinking about the kind of experience that they've received from their family, but also at their high school. And these kind of experiences shape the type of experience that they anticipate and that they look for when choosing a college. And so the life experience and upbringing part is essential because this actually shapes what students think about higher education. What's the purpose of college? What do you do in college? Therefore, which colleges should I look for when deciding where to apply to college? Okay. And I'll make the argument that higher SCS communities cultivate dispositions or preferences among their children for specific types of higher education opportunities. This is a way for them to give or help the kids gain advantage over other highly qualified candidates. So even though the middle-class children in this study have the same academic qualifications as the lower SCS students, as they're choosing college, they're trying to find college that can elevate them from the rest of other similarly qualified candidates. All right, so I looked at the role of institutions. So here I look mostly at how high schools for both lower and higher SCS students, as well as how college preparation programs for lower SCS students influence their choices of college. Many of these highly qualified lower SCS students participated in college preparation programs that expose them to colleges that typically weren't discussed within their high school. These college preparation programs also help them in preparing for application to four-year colleges as well. And what I'm arguing here is that these institutions shape the choices of students by imposing schemas or configurations of college. So they impose these configurations that essentially shape what students think are appropriate colleges for them. And so in the case of lower SCS students, they are often exposed to any post-secondary education schema. So this is when they are told by high schools or the college preparation program that they just need to pursue any additional education after high school. This could be a 2-year program. It could be a 4-year college graduate program. So this is a quote from a student who talked about this specific schema. And so she mentioned a couple, as I asked her about, what type of colleges actually come to recruit or what colleges are you actually exposed to at your high school? And she mentioned a couple of the UCs and a lot of schools that I didn't really know, like Alameda Art School. It was a lot of art schools, and then a lot of schools that aren't well known. So as you can see here, the school is pushing students to just pursue additional schooling after high school. And this is happening because these students who are high achieving, they are often outliers in their specific high school. And so the schools are often trying to target the average student, and the average student aren't these highly qualified students. If these high achieving students are relying upon their high school, they're not going to be able to identify colleges that fit their qualification. Okay. In addition to this, any post-secondary education schema, many lower SCS students are also exposed to an in-state 4-year college schema as well. And so this is the idea that after high school, these students should pursue a 4-year college. 2-year college are stigmatized, and 4-year colleges are encouraged. So this is a quote from a student talking about the kind of colleges that come to recruit, or the type of colleges that often encourage for students at his high school. So this student mentioned the Career Center. Every 2 weeks, they had a guest college come in. I remember they had UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC San Diego. Okay. And so this schema is also the schema that is also pushed upon students when they participate in college preparation program as well. Students are encouraged to apply to a four-year college. And then next up, I look at how the schema for higher SES students are different from lower SES students. So for higher SES students, they are exposed to a selective college anywhere schema. And for this specific configuration, they're encouraged to apply to top colleges across the country. And so these are some of the examples of what are these actually top colleges that students are encouraged to apply to. So here is a student talking about the type of colleges that they're exposed to, but also the type of colleges that their alumni have attended in the past. So this student makes the point, some aim for the Ivies. Maybe it's because a small high school that people feel more comfortable in a small liberal arts college. There's a lot of random ones like Bowdoin, Davidson, McAllister, Bates, and Wellesley. So as you can see here, the college choices that students are exposed to within the institutions are quite different. Higher SES students are encouraged to apply to colleges across the United States, but there's an emphasis on these top colleges. Lower SES students are often encouraged to pursue additional education after high school or pursue a four-year college. And so these institutions are an essential part of the explanation because they impose boundaries. They tell students what is appropriate for them. But students also have agency as well. And so the next slide is going to talk about, so for the students, what do they actually look at when they apply for college? What are the criteria that are important to their consideration? All right. And so here I'm going to talk mostly about what actually distinguishes the criteria of lower SES students from higher SES students. Of course, there are a lot of commonalities. Both students look at college major as a very important consideration. But here I'm emphasizing how the criteria are different between students of a different social class background. All right, so for lower SES students, many of them emphasize the importance of diversity. And so they want to apply to a college where they feel like they actually belong. And so some students talked about visiting colleges during their high school days. And, they visited, for instance, a student talked about visiting a private university, and she didn't see a lot of people that looked like her. And so that was a turnoff for her. And so she decided not to apply for that specific colleges. So diversity and belonging is very important, especially for non-Asian lower SES students, given the fact that at a lot of these top private colleges, Asian Americans are overrepresented. And so Asian Americans often don't talk as much about racial diversity as other minority students who are from lower SES background. Lower SES students also emphasize the importance of cost. How expensive is it to pursue a college? And this was also a big turnoff for them, as they some of it knew about these out-of-state colleges, especially the Ivy Leagues, but when they looked at the costs, that was a big discouragement for them. Lower SES students also had to deal with family obligations and responsibilities. Many of them talked about having to assist their family, and so as they think about college, they think about the importance of needing to be close to home so that their parents can support them, but they can also support their parents and younger siblings. And because of these different factors, lower SES students have a preference to stay close to home. So these criteria place spatial restrictions on where they can actually apply to college. Okay. In contrast to lower SES students, higher SES students emphasize a different set of criteria. One of them is college size. So many of these higher SES students attend small high schools. And so they actually, some of them, as they think about which colleges to apply to, they prefer the small school environment where they can actually get to interact with their professors or their teaching assistant, a much more intimate setting. On the other hand, some students actually dislike the small school atmosphere of their high school. And so in doing so, they actually prefer much more larger university. One student wanted to get away from the hand-holding that happens that he experienced at his high school. And so he actually prefer applying to large universities where he feels like he can be independent, where he doesn't have people telling him what to do on a daily basis. Higher SES students also emphasize college rankings as well. So many of them talked about having a list where they would take the first 20 to 30 colleges from the US News and Reports rankings, and from there decide of the top 20 or top 30, which one is the right fit for them. In addition to college rankings, many higher SES students, as they talk about which colleges to apply to, they talked about the importance of extracurricular opportunities. Many of them participate in sports, so they talk about the availability of sports. Some talked about research opportunities. Some talked about, study abroad opportunities, or just opportunities for internships during the summer. And because of these different criteria, many lower SES, higher SES students actually prefer to attend and apply to colleges away from California. And so that's what I'm going to talk about for the next couple of slides, is the location for lower SES students. Why is there a preference to stay close to home? And then for higher SES students, why is there a preference to actually go away for college? Because this helps to explain the differences in application to out-of-state colleges. And this is where family experiences and upbringing really comes into play, because these choices of college aren't just based on information or based on the pros and cons of these different colleges, but it's also based on the type of life that students anticipate or that they expect to have for the next 4 years of their life. And so social class upbringing and experiences play a pivotal role in shaping what kind of life students expect out of college, out of the next 4 years of their lives. All right, so I argue that the social class-based upbringing and family experiences shape students' narratives about themselves and their families, and this has the effect of either encouraging them to apply to college away from home, or it has the effect of actually imposing spatial limitations on their choices of college. So among my lower SES students, when they talk about their lives up to the point where they're applying to college, and they talk about their college choices, they present a narrative of interdependence. And so these are the different elements as they talk about who they are, where they are going. These are the different elements that come up in their narrative, the stories they tell about themselves, their families, and about their future. Many lower SES students recognize that their family has struggled or has sacrificed for them to be at a point where they can actually go to college. And so this come into play because of the importance of family and child interdependence here. Some students actually had family responsibilities and obligations. They had to assist their family even during high school. And so as they think about college, these considerations become important criteria in their search for what colleges is appropriate for them. For those who don't even, there are some students who don't have family obligations and responsibilities, but even for these students, because of the recognition of family struggles and sacrifices, many of the students actually anticipate that there could be future family struggles that might need their help, and so this imposes a special restrictions on where they can actually apply for college. And then for some students, especially the female students, parents actually were very hesitant to let them apply to colleges far from home. And this is much more likely the case for female than male students. All right, and then for the higher SES students, as they talk about their lives and as they talk about their future, they often emphasize elements that are quite different from those of their lower SES peers. And so higher SES students are often emphasizing initiative. So they talk about how they themselves identify opportunities for participation. So let's say, for example, students are talking about, during the summer, I get the freedom to identify what I want to do over the summer, which summer camps I want to participate in. And then my parents just pay for those activities. Okay? Even in the case where parents are often making suggestions for what students should do, these students assert that they still have autonomy, that yes, my parents are telling me about these opportunities, internships, but at the end of the day, it's up to my choosing what I want to participate in. Okay. And then because of the emphasis on initiative and autonomy, many of these students have a lot of experiences being away from home for the summer, being out of state, being at summer camp, participating in an internship. And so as a result of this, their narratives also consist of elements of exploration and curiosity, how participating in summer camps or being part of a internship expose them to new opportunities, new outlooks, and it makes them want to pursue these experiences once they're in college as well. So here I'm going to actually present just a couple of students to illustrate how these narratives actually play out in their choices of college. So the first is Jack. He is a high-achieving, low-income student. He is the only child of a single mother who works as an in-home care provider. His mother doesn't speak English very well, and so he's been helping her out throughout the course of his high school career. Okay. And so here he talks about just the sort of assistance that he has to provide for his mother and how that might impact him as he think about his college choice. So he states, it gives me a sense of guilt because she's working hard as an immigrant and she doesn't understand English. I know that she relies on me a lot. What will she do if I go to college? She wants me to go to college. I want to go to college. The issue is I don't know when I go to college what will happen to her when she needs me. So as he thinks about what he has had to do for his mother, he actually projects that to the future. If I go to college, who's going to be there for my mother? And so we actually see this have a direct impact on his choices of college. Okay? And so he states, so this is he didn't actually apply to any out-of-state colleges. So I asked him kind of the reason for that. And so he stated, in state, I feel like I'll have a few good friends who will allow me to borrow a car or drive me back to help my mom out for a bit. Worst comes to worst, I always have this surplus amount of money to buy a ticket home. Out of state is not an option, and plane ticket is not an option. Okay? So as you can see, the narrative or the understanding of his life growing up affects his choices of college. He can't imagine being far away from home because he's already imagining that there are going to be family challenges in the future. And if that's the case, how is he going to get back home if he's far away from her? Okay. All right. All right. So this is another student. He is Marcus. His family has lived throughout the United States. They moved to different cities in search of better working conditions. And so here he's talking about his family experiences and how it has an impact on his choices of college. Okay. All right. So he talks about his upbringing and what lessons that has actually taught him. So he states, we are close because my parents they only have a high school degree and they are always working. Me and my brothers, we are close because we don't have anyone to depend on. We move around too much, so we need each other. And so here we're beginning to see the development of this narrative of interdependence, that the family is close-knit because it's necessary for their survival. And so if that's the experience that he has growing up, how does that impact his choices of college? Okay.
Professor Lowe, I just want to let you know you have 5 more minutes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay. All right. And then for his college choices, not only does his experience affect where he thinking apply to college, but also what his parents have said to him in the past. So his parents says, I think this is how he summarizes what they say to him as he thinks about applying for college. I think the biggest thing they have tried to enforce is that when we get our own family is to make sure that we become close to our relatives because they are saying that having access to relatives and getting to know them would have helped us on multiple occasions. Okay? And so they were actually homeless on several occasions. And part of the reasoning, as the parents explain it, is because they didn't have a lot of family connection. Okay? And so this type of experiences affects his choices of college. So here he talks about why he didn't actually apply to an out-of-state college. So he mentions, at the moment, I'm more keen on going to a UC because of all the devs or things in my family. I still want to go to MIT. That's still my number 1 choice, but I have to put that aside for when I go for my graduate degree. At the moment, I'm going to try to stay in state. All right. So for the next few slides, we're going to talk more about the narrative of independence for higher SES students. The different elements, how do they actually, what do they actually look like in the specific experience of these next 2 students? Okay. So this is Anna. She is, both of her parents have advanced degrees in their fields. Her parents are immigrants from Europe, and so she's been able to travel quite a bit to Europe with her parents, but also by herself as well. And so here she talks about her experience, and she emphasizes autonomy. So she states, I don't think they ever forced me to do anything. I'm lucky. I got to figure that out because of all that freedom, because of all the freedom that I have to figure out for myself what it is that I want to do. It's helpful because I would stick to this and be more motivated to do it because it's my idea and not someone else's idea. So she's talking about just the ability to be able to choose and to have her parents finance, whether it's these internships or summer excursions outside of the country. And so this affects her decision to apply to out-of-state college. And so I actually asked these students directly, some students are actually hesitant to apply to out-of-state colleges. Why are you applying to out-of-state colleges? And so she mentioned, I didn't think about it as I'm going away from college, from home. It's like I'm going to someplace different. I have absolutely no problem going to school there. I want to go on adventures. I want to experience the world. That means I have to leave California. I love traveling to new places. So because of the life experiences that they've accumulated, these students have a different understanding of what college is about. Okay. And so oftentimes it's about exploration. It's about being exposed to new places, new opportunity, and new experiences. A similar narrative is also expressed by Lana as well. His parents, one of them is an accountant. The other is an editor for a nonprofit organization. And so here he's talking about just how the resources help him explore in high school. Okay. So he states, I think my parents, they've always tried to expose me to different things, especially my dad. He takes me on his trips to see different parts, see different things. I get to see his environmental work in Tibet. So, he's showing me that I can do whatever I like to do. That's good for college. I think generally they're pretty open. They didn't force me to do anything that I didn't really want to do. So because of his experience, being able to travel, and do a lot of internships and different experiences, he also has a similar understanding of college like the previous student. Okay. So here he talks about why he applied to an out-of-state college. He states, I think just expanding my horizon, maturing as a person, learning practical skills. I feel like I'm pretty mature, I think, for myself, but I don't think I have any practical skills that I can apply in a job situation. Getting some of that, expanding, getting to know the world better. I just think it brings a lot of different opportunities. If I don't go, I will be stuck. There's not much going on here. And so for him, college is an extension of what he has experienced. Okay. All right. So this is my final slide, Stephen. This is my conclusion slide. I know we're running short on time. All right. And so
you can take a few more minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Need a few more minutes to draw conclusions.
Okay. Yeah. So my book is really emphasizing just how social class inequality is reproduced. And I make the argument that, we often talk a lot about qualifications. We often talk a lot about the importance of information. What I emphasize in my book here is the importance of social class-based experiences because they shape the cultural understandings that students have for what type of colleges they think are appropriate for them. So as we can see, given the narrative that lower SES students express, they expect a continuation of that, which means family and student interdependence. which places spatial restrictions on their choices of college. In the case of higher SES students, we just see how they are brought up differently, and they have a different set of experiences, and so a different set of preferences for what they look for in a college and a university. And so that enables them to apply to colleges across the United States because of a different understanding about what is the purpose of college. Is it just to go get a degree, or is it really to expand your horizon as a person? All right, and then I think for a lot of sociologists, we are good at explaining how things are the way they are, but I also want to offer some suggestions for possibilities of change as well. The first possibility is that we need to expand and provide more opportunities for different social experiences for our lower SES students. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on making sure that these students are highly qualified, but the choices of college is not just based on qualification, but also based on the type of life experience that students have accumulated and what they anticipate that they're going to experience in college. Not only that, given my emphasis on how understandings are different, I do think that helping to work on shifting the narratives that exist among students can also be helpful as well. Even though lower SES students are presenting a narrative of interdependence, one can make the case that this is actually a narrative of independence. They have very little resources, but still they've been able to achieve at the level of their higher SES peers. And so maybe the narrative might not be one of interdependence, but of independence or one of resilience. And perhaps such a narrative can make them much more open to colleges out of state. So I'll leave it at that, and then we can have more conversations about things that I didn't get a chance to cover.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Law. You provided some very interesting details, a very thoughtful analysis, and some insightful respondent stories. And as you make clear towards the end of your presentation, there are very significant policy implications and possibilities for intervention and action in ways that will benefit these students. Now we're going to have a response and a conversation from one of our Institute's faculty affiliates, Dr. Tolani Britton, who is an associate professor at the Berkeley School of Education. Dr. Britton researches students' transitions from secondary school to higher education, as well as access and retention in higher education. She has published in journals including the Journal of Research on Educational Effectiveness, Journal of Higher Education, the American Behavioral Scientist, the Journal of Economics, Race and Policy, and the Teachers College Record. Prior to earning her doctorate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Professor Britton worked as a high school math teacher and a college counselor in New York City in public schools. So we're confident that she can speak to these issues from both a research and a practitioner perspective. Welcome, Professor Britton, and over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Professor Small. And thank you for the opportunity to read Unequal Choices and be in conversation with you, Professor Lohr. I so often read books and have questions for the author, so this is really exciting for me to read the book, but then actually be able to ask you the questions in real time. I really appreciate thinking about this work from both the research standpoint, where in many ways we're sort of told to take ourselves out of the work, and then that of a former high school math teacher and college counselor in New York City. And then the final piece that I'll actually bring in is that, I'm the child of immigrants whose parents knew about public colleges in New York City and the Ivy Leagues, and not very much in between. And so my own college process was very much guided by going to a large public high school, suburban high school, where I was directed to apply to many of these small liberal arts institutions that your higher SES students, to which your higher SES students apply, but many of the working class students from working class backgrounds and families did not apply. That being said, I'm sort of on this journey where I hold the importance of access to highly selective colleges, as well as the tension with the question of appropriateness and fit which you raised in this book, Professor Laura, in some really fascinating ways, and how complex that is, given that institutions and institutions of higher education in the United States were on average built and designed for high income white men, right? A really specific group. And we know that change is at best incremental in large, complex organizations like colleges. So I'll actually start with a short story from my own experience as a high school counselor in a college preparatory school. I was actually the math teacher, and the school was a college preparatory school, and they had no college counselor. And this was a school in the South Bronx, so all of our students were from working class families. When it came to apply to college, I was a high school math teacher, almost no experience as a college counselor, only my own experience, and we know how limited our own experiences are. And so I was like, this is what we do. You apply to safety, target, reach schools. And then you attend the best, and the best I defined as the most selective school to which you are admitted with the best financial aid package, right? So I was like, look, I'm covering bases. My students pushed back really hard on me. And at the time, my perspective was going to the most selective school is the best strategy as long as you're not taking on debt to do so. What they pushed back on in particular, and many of them were young women, was going in cohorts to schools that were selective, but not as selective as the ones that for which I was pushing, quite frankly, but going in cohorts. The experience for me, and so at the time I was like, quite honestly in my head, you get to make the choice you make. I don't think it's the right choice for you. And in hindsight, right, so this was, early 2000s, my students were right. That going to schools in cohorts that were not as selective, they were absolutely selective. So I want to be clear about that. And I think, Professor Laura, you actually talk about this in your book, that students were going to selective regional schools, but not necessarily thinking of a national search. For me, has just been a journey from what I believed to the experiences of my own students to my work currently as a researcher, where part of what I explore is what are the programs and policies that increase not only college access, so thinking about where students apply, where they enter, but college success. And success along a number of dimensions. We're absolutely thinking about persistence, completion, grad school, labor market outcomes. I'm also sort of bringing into the conversation some of the work of economists like Raj Chetty, who have looked at social mobility indices. And much of what they've found is that the CSUs and other regional selective schools, but not necessarily highly selective private institutions, are actually some of the places in which changes to student social mobility, and particularly for students from working class families, is actually greatest. CSUs, the City University of New York system, University of Illinois. And so as a result, I am really grappling, I think, with the decisions that students make, the ways in which these are influenced by their narratives, their experiences, and whether, and I think, Professor Laura, you really reach this conclusion in some ways, whether some of the perceptions or ideas that we see as limiting are actually really good decisions for students and families. And this sort of brings me to some of my questions for you. One is really thinking about interventions. I really appreciated how you brought the voices of students and the perspectives of students out in this work. And I'm wondering if, or how you see the interplay of shifting the information and experiences. I'm clearly very struck by the fact that, many students who had traveled or gone to, visit schools, some of them had different perceptions and were more open to applying. I'm also wondering, in some ways, moving from the individual acts of students to the structural conditions, how are you thinking about ways that institutions, high schools, and colleges might be, what are some of the changes that they should be thinking about so that it's not simply the students needing to visit their campuses, but the schools actually not only recruiting the students, but creating places where the students can come visit and then see themselves. So I'll stop there, so give you some space. But that's what I'm really thinking about. What are some institutional and structural changes that might be made in order to change access and success of students, and particularly working class students in these highly selective institutions?
Yeah, thank you for that, Tolani. Yeah, and I think, yeah, my book is focused on the meaning part, and so some of the interventions are really at the individual level, but you make the good point about how about the structural level, institutional level? What's the responsibility of these elite colleges to making sure that they have a diverse student body when it comes to socioeconomic differences? And just given the fact that information is important, but often it's not often like the game changer that we expect it to be. Students need to feel like they're comfortable. I think it's so essential that these colleges actually have programs that actually bring these students over years before they actually start applying, just to get an exposure to the sort of opportunities, the sort of experiences, but not just bring them on campus. I think it's so important that they actually see and interact with people that's relatable. Because if you go on tours, it's hard to find somebody that's relatable because you just see faces, and it's hard to find somebody that understands where you come from. And so I think part of it is institutions need to provide more resources to bring these kids on campus, but also provide a nurturing environment, an environment where they can actually get mentored by students of a similar background, so that they actually feel comfortable. And I'll just give, this is kind of my like a personal experience for me too. So when I was applying for college, I had to choose between a public university and a private university. I went to the public university during visit weekend, and it felt great. It felt like I felt comfortable because people I could relate to as a first-gen college student. And then I went to the private college, and it was super isolating. I mean, the college counselors were talking to students, asking them about their high schools and making connections with them. Oh, we've had students from those high school before. And I just feel like as a first-gen college student, you tell them your high school and there's like no connection there. And it was, it's quite isolating. I almost didn't actually decide to attend the private colleges, more selective. It gave me more money. And at the end of the day, it was a 3-day event. I almost called my parents to come pick me up. And was like, this is not the right place for me. But I actually encountered some Asian American student activists on campus who were behind the reason I got to the university in the first place. They actually did a lot of activism to get more Southeast Asian Americans onto campus. And so after an evening with them, it just felt like this is home. And so I just think like those experiences, finding relatable people on campus. Campus is not just a space, just a physical space, but it's also a social space. And I think the more that institutions can make this space more welcoming, the more we can get lower SES students or students from racially marginalized background a chance to actually think about seeing themselves succeed at these institutions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective that in many ways it's the individual connections, right? You can make structural changes, but it's the individual connections that actually motivate students to apply and attend schools. What I'm also hearing in that statement in some ways is that it does require some critical mass. It seems like it wasn't one student who connected with you, it was a set of students who were activists. And that's the piece that I think I'm reflecting on. How do you get to that critical mass? And in particular, given the Supreme Court decisions around affirmative action, I don't want to ask you to get into the prediction business. Whenever people ask me to make predictions, I say, that's way above my pay grade. However, I am wondering how you're thinking about ways to build critical mass for institutions, given that that is actually how you bring more working class students from below SES backgrounds onto campuses, and retain those students and have them enroll in your school.
Yeah, so it seems like there's different stages to achieving that critical mass versus application, making sure that students applied in the first place. And the second aspect is admissions. Or do we, what are our admissions criteria, and are they perhaps privileging students with more resources over others, whether it's race or class or gender? And then we also have the issue in enrollment. Okay, so you get accepted and you go there and it doesn't feel comfortable, or there's not enough programming to show you that you are valued, that your experiences are validated, then you might not even enroll. And so I think we have to think about application, admissions, and enrollment, just to get students into the university. But as you mentioned earlier, persistence is also key. What's the point of bringing these students onto campus and then not providing any support for them to be successful? And so I think there's all these different steps, and it seems like there's always barriers at each of these steps and make it so difficult for us to achieve that critical mass for students who come from underrepresented background. And so I don't have an answer to that, but I just think these are the different stages we have to examine. It's like a pipeline to make sure that we get to that stage where students from underrepresented background can see themselves attending these colleges, where then they're seen as good colleges, but not elitist. Elitist, when people say something is elitist, they often are making the point that it's not for them. And so I do think that we have to think about these different stages to make sure we get to that critical mass where students are actually making choices that are based on their personal preferences and not based on kind of the barriers that make it difficult for them to see themselves in these spaces.
Now, I really appreciate that, Yang, that it really would be based on student decisions versus and how they feel like there is a good fit, right? As opposed to this is good enough, and not because of the barriers, right? Like there's so many barriers, I'm just going to do what's good enough because there are all these barriers being put in my way to making other choices. So I really appreciate that point. I believe we're supposed to be opening it up to questions. I have one final question for you, as I believe that individuals, students, other attendees will be putting their questions in the Q&A.
You can certainly go ahead, Tolani, with your question.
Okay, well then I will take. I'm wondering. So you talked a little bit about where students applied, and I'm really wondering, particularly when looking at the low SES students and the high SES students, or students from high and low SES families, where they ended up attending. Mm-hmm. I appreciated the sort of cliffhanger, and here's where they applied, without actually knowing what the outcomes were.
Yeah, and so I interviewed them over the course of a couple of years, and so I wasn't able to. This is the hard part. It's like chasing people after a year or two, and so I didn't actually have a chapter on that because I didn't have enough data. So most lower SES students got accepted to a UC, and that's typically where they mostly went to. Higher S students kind of all over the map. But there's several students who talked about appealing the decisions, which I never heard from my lower SES students. So there's another level of difference there, is that do you accept the choice you're given, or you feel like you feel like you deserve more? And I think that narrative about just independence and autonomy and initiative, I think it really shapes how higher S students approach the different steps in the college choice process. And I think there's a recognition. I think when there's a recognition from higher SES students that they are viewed as dependent. And so I think when they talk about their story, it's really with that in the back of their mind. So they're really like, it's really a narrative. They're picking and choosing aspects to make the case that I'm unique. Okay, I'm unique. I'm not like the other people. I do things out of passion. And so I think that's part of the narrative too, is that it's not just merely a reflection of your life experience, but it's also how you make sense of it. And we definitely see the making sense of it much more pronounced amongst higher SES, whereas I think for lower SES, it's more of a projection of what has happened. There's perhaps less meaning making or less trying to fitted so that make it the narrative sound much more much more likable.
Less spin is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Professor Small, turning it over to you.
Okay, good. Well, thank you both. You've given us more than enough food for thought. I have a whole list of questions, but as moderator, I'll wait a while and we'll turn to questions from the audience. Our first question is this, from an anonymous attendee. I have wondered if low SES students don't know they are really wanted by selective colleges and that they can receive a great deal of financial aid, sometimes free tuition. Did you find out whether they know this or not?
Yeah, I think some of them don't and some of them do. Many of these top private colleges, if your parents makes less than like 100K, you get free tuition, free room and board. Some of them recognize that, but the barriers of thinking about going to these colleges, which is far away from home, was just too much for them. And that brings up another point about it's not just a matter of making sure that they have a free education, but the people need to get back home for the holidays, for emergency. And so that's a main concern for a lot of the students is it might be an education that is affordable, but what about my emergency that I have? And how do I get back home if I'm all the way across the country? So I do think knowledge of it does help lessen some of the barriers, but doesn't completely eliminate some of just the lack of application to out-of-state colleges.
And this is part, as I read it, this is part of the commitment of individual family members to their family and to sustaining their family, which is a very important cultural criterion across all communities, but has variations across communities that are racialized or minoritized and gendered. Okay, we have a question from Jeffrey Wesley. Wesley Jeffrey, I'm not sure which way it goes. Can you talk about variations amongst the low SES students? What led some students to apply out of state? I think you touched on that.
No, I didn't talk about it as much, but I'm glad this question came up because we did have some outliers. Some students did actually apply to out-of-state colleges. I'll give you a couple of examples. One student, she went to a low-income school in Oakland. Initially, she was hesitant about going to college because she thought they were just trying to rip them off. She was part of a program for high achieving students. And so they actually took her to visit colleges across the United States. She also got a chance to participate in many social experiences. So she went hiking up in the state of Washington. She got a chance to go down to South America to meet an environmental group. All this while she was in high school. And so she reflected upon that experience, how her parents, who were Asian immigrants, she reflected that they had what she called kind of a more limited view about where she can go to college, and that they wanted her to stay home. And she recognized that was limiting because she's had all these exposure with different people and different societies. And so for her, college, she wanted to live that experience for the next 4 years. So that's one instance where, because of the social experiences, this student is able to make sense of college in a way where applying to out of state seems like a right fit for her. And then I also have a student who went to a private school. And so this student got a scholarship to go to a private high school. And so I asked him about, a lot of students are concerned about out of state colleges. Why are you applying to out of state colleges? And so he reflected upon that experience. He had a transfer from his neighborhood school to this private school. And so initially, he had a lot of concern at the high school level. He thought they were elitist. He didn't think he would be able to compete. But his success, that helped him to make sense of these top colleges in a way where it was less intimidating. So he talked about, initially I was very concerned about coming to this high school because just that, they're much better off than I am. But I've been here for 4 years. I've been successful. And so I do think that, even if I apply to these top colleges, I'll be successful as well. But for him, because he goes to a private school, he's getting more than information. He knows students that have gone to these small liberal arts colleges. He was mentioning how he called up an alumni that was at McAllister College. And had a conversation, and that school seems like a right fit for him, because for him, if previous students from my high school have gone there and succeeded and they like it, even though I never heard of it, I might also enjoy it as well. So I should definitely apply there. And so I think the combination of experiences away from home, as well as the context under which information about college is received, are critical to shaping applications to out-of-state colleges or to these top colleges.
Okay. We have a person in the audience who asked, I think I heard Professor Britton suggest that the lower SES student decisions were indeed appropriate for them or their situations, which I really appreciate. And I'd love to hear anything more the speakers want to say about that, about decisions that were appropriate for them. Did I make that question clear?
Oh yeah, that was clear.
Okay.
And I guess I can
take
answer
a moment. You don't have to jump
yeah.
on it. Yeah, take a
And
moment.
then Tolani, you can also answer after me.
Yeah.
So in my book, I talked about the difference between appropriate colleges and also the right fit, which Tolani brought up earlier. Appropriate colleges is essentially what the institutions like high schools and college preparation program deem, what's appropriate for their students. And then the students themselves have to engage in the process of figuring out what's the right fit. So even in the case of lower SES students, some of them participate in programs where they were actually exposed to these small liberal arts colleges, or these Ivy League university. The programs were telling them, apply to these colleges. They have good financial aid, but from some students, it just didn't seem like a right fit. Like one student mentioned, I've never been to New York, and all I know about New York are these alleys from movies that I watch, and it seems intimidating, or the weather is different, or that I prefer the kind of cultural diversity of California. So, students are kind of making sense of what's right for them. And, I think it's a good question about, what is appropriate, because it seems like my book is making the case that they should be applying to these top colleges because they're often the stepping stone to positions of power, but they might not be the most welcoming place for these students. And so how do we determine what's appropriate for these students? Is it what's going to enable them to reach their highest potential, or what's going to enable them to feel like they actually belong and still be successful? And I think that's a tough question to answer for me, is how do we determine what's appropriate for our student? Is it based on the resources that these colleges provide, based on what they can actually achieve, or based on what's right for them given their family situation?
Yeah, again, I appreciate that. I will briefly respond to it. I think that appropriate and fit have, I feel like I'm on this sort of road to Damascus journey here, where I started in one place and now I am in a place of questioning. Some of the recent work that I've done is actually looking at the relationship between racially motivated hate crimes and enrollment, for example, in HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And as a result of that work, I've also been paying a lot of attention to sort of post-Supreme Court decision around affirmative action, the most recent one, the surge in applications to HBCUs, HSIs, and thinking about the ways in which students and families with information who have traveled and visited are opting, right, with their applications to go to places that are affirming of their children, students, families, and family experiences. And so I approach the work of thinking about fit and appropriateness with a lot of humility, given my own experiences where I thought I knew what was really great for families and students. And they made choices that actually were both appropriate and a good fit for them. And so what I really appreciate, Yang, is your perspective that what we do want to do is make sure that students have opportunities to, visit colleges out of state and campuses out of state and connect with students with potentially similar experiences because of race, ethnicity, or gender identity on those campuses, and international experiences. So making sure that students have access to the experiences that can help be part of the decision process, and also trusting that with that information, with those experiences, that students and families are making decisions that are about access and success. Last sort of point is that, particularly thinking about the HBCUs, many of the, sort of Black doctors, engineers who go on to grad school are coming out of the HBCUs, which, on most ranking systems are not the most highly ranked or most selective schools, but they are places of affirmation. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. We have a question that goes as follows. I'd like to ask a little more about the family context. A good point the students make is that they must help their families. And I think it doesn't matter how much. It doesn't matter if they feel home in private colleges, if they have to return and help their parents and siblings. Therefore, isn't it necessary to consider the welfare and support for the families as well, and not only the policies for the students? And if so, the reduction of inequalities in higher education is a general societal policy, not only a focused policy on young, high-achieving students. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think, the reason why we're talking about social class inequality in education is that the inequality pervades our society. And so, I think it would be great if we can just eliminate these social class disparity or racial disparities in the first place so that we don't even have to address them. And so it's just a matter of what's the targeted intervention? Is it at the societal level? So making sure that, students are going to high school that have the same level of resources. Perhaps that can eliminate some of these barriers. But I think that's just it's a great question. And it's really about where's the intervention? Are we focusing too specifically on just the college level, the individuals here, and we should think more broadly about how societal is unequal and address those inequality. But yeah, I don't have a specific answer, but I'm just trying to make sense and think about the specific question.
What I understand from your presentation and discussion and the question is that, there are multiple points where interventions can and should be made. And all the, at the level of the school, at the level of a community, at the level of society or a state, in different arenas, whether it's legal, whether it's employment, whether it's health, family, and so on. And people make decisions about where they feel they need to make the interventions. You can't intervene everywhere, or individuals are not going to intervene everywhere. So the question, that it raises, as I think you've implied, is that, there are interventions necessary in schools, but these interventions, if I can put it this way, are going to face obstacles of success without consideration of these broader interventions, of these broader obstacles. Okay, we have a couple more questions. Let's try to get to them. It's actually related to what we're saying or what you're saying. What are the most impactful ways? Oh yeah, let me get this right. It's from an individual who's saying, what are the most impactful ways I can help students at the Title I school my son graduated from? They are mostly low SES with immigrant parents. I volunteer for college field trips and help them practice interviewing, but I'd like to do more without stepping on toes of their parents. So here's a person ready to put their energies in an intervention. What would be your advice?
I think the most one that doesn't require a lot of resource is thinking about how do we shift the narratives of students and their understandings of themselves or their community and their college in a way where it's uplifting, where it's not just focused on barriers. I think too often, students are rightfully lower SES are rightfully to focus on kind of the obstacles that they have to deal with. But I also do think that the fact that they're succeeding, okay, it says a lot about their resilience. And so something that doesn't cost money is how do we help to shift the narratives, the stories the students tell about themselves, so that these narratives aren't as limiting. It's hard to address some of these larger obstacles because they require financial resources, much more larger intervention. But at the much smaller level, I think figuring out like what stories do they have about themselves and where they're going, and how can we interrupt narratives that might not be as productive or helpful to them to kind of get out of their situation or perhaps pursue higher education. So I would say that's something that can be done immediately. It's just helping students shape those narrative that can be more productive in terms of helping them move forward.
Professor Britton, what did you advise people to do when you were a school teacher?
Yeah, well, that's a different question. What I would advise now and what I would
okay, yeah.
advise then.
Based on your experience, what would you advise now?
Absolutely. So I think that one really powerful thing that you can do now, and I think this really aligns with your research, Yang, is I think local visits to some of the Bay Area schools, and that means, you know, schools on the peninsula, schools like UC Berkeley, taking students there often is relatively low cost because tours and things like that are free. And meeting with groups of students who potentially have similar backgrounds, right? I'm thinking ethno-racial or first-gen backgrounds to the students at your son's school, I think would be a really powerful way in the present that's low cost and accessible to expand students' understandings of what's possible. I also think that in conversations with students, it's really helpful for students to hear and understand that these are not individual barriers, they're structural. And oftentimes they have been by design. I think about things like redlining, where people live, the kind of food to which they have access. And so students are really empowered and know so much, and having conversations with them about here are barriers and, right, the resilience and the beauty of our communities and the ways in which students, right, who have had similar experiences to you are navigating these campuses and making use of their resources. So those are some of the pieces. One, having conversations with our brilliant, resilient students about the barriers and approaches to them, and then having them visit and be in community with other students on local college campuses, given how many highly selective campuses, public and private, we have in the Bay Area.
Okay, thank you. We're nearing the end of today's presentation. We have time for one last question and hopefully a quick answer. Although it's a very big question, what research needs to be done in order to help first-gen students succeed in selective colleges? Could I add to it, what would be your priority in research? If you could respond to that briefly.
Yeah, I think for a lot of students who are underrepresented, that sense of belonging, sense of validation is so critical. A lot of research has shown that to be true. That, you know, if students don't have to worry about whether they belong or not, they will persist through, especially the STEM majors, you know, for females or even for underrepresented minorities. And so that sense of belonging is so crucial because, as we see from research, when students have to deal with these thoughts about not being capable or imposter syndrome thoughts, it interferes with their ability to focus. It's a major distraction, major source of stress. So having physical spaces or social spaces on campus where students can actually go and feel like themselves, where they don't have to worry about how other people perceive them or whether or not they actually belong. I think this would be a good kind of intervention. And then the resource aspect as well, making sure that, you know, if there are internships available, they should be paid internships. Or, you know, if it requires the students actually travel somewhere, that there should be stipends for that as well. So we're trying to minimize some of these barriers to being able to experience everything the college has to offer. Okay. Did you have a comment, Tolani? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'll make it brief.
Please.
Yeah, I think that it's a really good question, and I think that this is some of the work that we're currently doing. So my answer is reflective of the fact that we are building it as we fly it. But I think that one of the benefits of these selective colleges is that they are highly resourced. Many of them have very large endowments and really just pretty high per student spending. And so I would even say plethora of resources in these places means that many of the challenges that students face can at least be partially met. What that requires is asking students what they need. Too often we design solutions based on what researchers think students need, or sometimes even campuses think students need, without a real understanding of some of the challenges. So I think that designing solutions that are informed by the very real needs of students, right? We think about some of the work that's been done by people like Tony Jack around, where do students go if they don't have money to get home for a holiday, right? Or they don't have food when the dining halls close. And so using some of those resources to support the needs of the students, but being informed by the students. And I think similarly in terms of the belonging, using some of those resources to support many student-led, and Yang, I appreciate you're referring to student-led efforts and activism efforts to make campuses more welcome places for all students. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Professor Lowe, for your stimulating presentation. Thank you, Professor Britton, for your intriguing questions and discussion with Professor Lowe. We thank you both. This high-quality presentation is consistent with presentations at the Center for Research on Social Change. We thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank in particular my Associate Director, Deborah Lustig, and the Office Manager, Max van der Varker, for their technical skills and production skills. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Please look out for future announcements of future presentations. And I wish you both, Professor Lowe and Professor Britton, success in your continued research. Thank you very much.